Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going to take a deep dive into Bitcoin. We've got some great resources for this one. We've got the Wikipedia article, of course, and a great explainer from Investopedia. Plus a beginner's guide that I found that I thought was really helpful. So Bitcoin, it's been in the news for years. Seems like everybody's talking about it, but a lot of folks still aren't really sure what it is or how it works. So that's our mission today, right? To demystify Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and hopefully by the end of this deep dive, people will have a much better understanding of what Bitcoin is and how it works and why it's such a revolutionary technology.
Okay, so let's start with the most basic question. What is Bitcoin?
Well, in the simplest terms, Bitcoin is a digital currency. It's money that exists only online. You can use it to buy things, just like you would use dollars or euros. But the big difference is that Bitcoin doesn't rely on banks or governments to function.
Well, wait a minute. No banks? No government control? That's like a whole new way of thinking about money.
It is. It's a completely decentralized system.
Okay, so help me understand this decentralized thing.
Sure. Imagine a network where no single person or entity has control. That's what decentralization means in the context of Bitcoin. There's no central authority calling the shots, no government that can shut it down, no bank that can freeze your account.
So it's like a network of friends sharing a file instead of relying on a single server that could crash or be controlled by someone else.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. And that decentralized nature is one of the things that makes Bitcoin so secure. With no single point of attack, it's much harder for hackers to cause problems.
Okay, so that makes sense. But how does it actually work? How do we keep track of all these transactions if there's no central authority?
That's where the blockchain comes in. It's the heart of the Bitcoin system.
All right, the blockchain. I've heard that term thrown around a lot.
Right. It can be a little confusing at first. Basically, the blockchain is like a giant public ledger. It keeps a record of every single Bitcoin transaction ever made.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So it's like a massive digital spreadsheet that everyone can see.
You can think of it that way. And the amazing thing is that this ledger is constantly being updated and verified by a network of computers all around the world.
So it's not just stored in one place.
Nope. It's distributed across thousands of computers, which makes it incredibly difficult to tamper with.
But if anyone can see it, couldn't someone try to cheat the system? Like change the numbers to their advantage or something?
That's a good question, and that's where the genius of the blockchain design comes in. Each block of transactions is linked to the previous block using cryptography, which is like a super strong digital lock.
Oh, I see.
This makes it practically impossible to tamper with the blockchain because any change would be immediately obvious to everyone on the network.
So it's like a permanent, unbreakable record of every Bitcoin transaction.
Pretty much.
That's pretty impressive. But there's one thing I'm still wondering about. How are new Bitcoins created in the first place?
That's a great question, and it leads us to the concept of Bitcoin mining.
Mining, like digging for gold.
Well, not exactly digging in the dirt, but the idea of uncovering something valuable is there. Bitcoin mining is the process by which new Bitcoins are created and transactions are verified on the network.
Okay, so how does that actually work?
Imagine a global competition where people are using powerful computers to solve incredibly complex math problems. These miners, as they're called, are racing to solve these puzzles, and the first one to crack the code gets to add the next block of transactions to the Bitcoin blockchain.
So it's like a giant digital Sudoku competition, and the winner gets to write the next page of Bitcoin's history.
That's a great way to put it. And for their efforts, they get rewarded with newly created Bitcoins.
Wow, that's pretty wild. So no government printing press is involved. New Bitcoins are created by these miners solving math problems.
Exactly. It's a very different system than what we're used to with traditional currencies.
So we've covered what Bitcoin is. We talked about how it works on a decentralized network, and we've even touched on how new Bitcoins are created through mining.
Yeah.
But what can you actually DO with Bitcoin?
Well, that's a question with a lot of answers, and we'll dive into that after a quick word from our sponsors.
Okay, sounds good. We'll be right back with more on The Deep Dive.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Before the break, we were talking about how new Bitcoins are created through a process called mining.
Yeah, mining. It's such a strange word to use for something that's all digital.
Right. It does conjure up images of pickaxes and gold rushes, but it's really all about computational power. These miners are basically competing to solve these incredibly complex math problems. problems. And the first one to solve the problem gets to add the next block of transactions to the Bitcoin blockchain.
Okay, so they're like digital prospectors.
In a way, yeah.
But instead of digging in the dirt, they're using computers to solve equations?
Exactly.
And the winner gets, what, a Bitcoin trophy.
Haha. Not quite a trophy. But they do get rewarded with newly created Bitcoins. It's like a payment for their computational work.
Yeah. So no government printing press is involved. New Bitcoins are created by these miners solving math problems. Okay, I think I'm following so far. But let's get practical for a second.
Yeah.
What can you actually do with Bitcoin?
Ah, the million-dollar question. Well, in the early days, Bitcoin was mainly seen as a way to make online payments. A kind of digital cash, if you will.
Okay, so like buying stuff online.
Yeah, exactly.
But I've heard that it's becoming more than just that.
You're absolutely right. As Bitcoin has gained popularity, its uses have expanded way beyond just online payments.
Like what?
Well, we're seeing businesses of all kinds starting to accept Bitcoin as payment, from online retailers to brick-and-mortar stores, even some coffee shops.
Really?
Yeah, it's becoming more mainstream, and businesses like it because transaction fees are often lower than traditional payment methods, and payments are processed much faster.
That's interesting. But doesn't the fluctuating price of Bitcoin make it kind of risky for businesses to accept? Like, what if the value drops suddenly after they've made a sale?
That's a valid concern, and that's one reason why some businesses choose to use payment processors that immediately convert Bitcoin payments into their local currency.
Oh, so they get the benefits of Bitcoin without having to worry about the price swings.
Exactly.
That's pretty smart. Okay, so businesses are starting to use it more, but what about the average person? Is Bitcoin something they could use for everyday purchases?
That's a good question. While it's technically possible to buy everyday things with Bitcoin, it's not quite as easy as using a credit card or cash just yet.
Yeah, I can imagine. Trying to type in those long Bitcoin wallet addresses every time you want to buy a cup of coffee sounds like a pain.
Yeah, it can be a bit cumbersome. But the good news is that new technologies are being developed to make Bitcoin payments faster and easier. Have you heard of the Lightning Network?
The Lightning Network. It rings a bell, but I don't really know what it is.
It's basically a separate, faster lane for Bitcoin transactions. It allows for much quicker and cheaper payments without having to wait for confirmations on the main Bitcoin blockchain.
Oh, so it's like a Bitcoin superhighway.
That's a great way to think about it. And as technologies like the Lightning Network improve, we can expect to see Bitcoin become more and more practical for everyday use.
That makes sense. So payments are becoming easier. But I've also heard that Bitcoin can be used for more than just buying and selling things.
Absolutely. There are some really exciting possibilities being explored beyond just payments.
Oh, like what?
Well, imagine a world where you could use Bitcoin to verify your identity online, or track products through a supply chain, or even vote securely in elections.
Whoa, that's some next level stuff.
Right. And all of this is possible thanks to the unique properties of the blockchain.
So Bitcoin could potentially revolutionize not just finance, but whole industries.
It's definitely a possibility. But of course, there are still challenges and hurdles to overcome.
Like what?
Well, one of the big ones is regulatory uncertainty. Governments around the world are still trying to figure out how to deal with this whole cryptocurrency thing, and that lack of clarity can make businesses and investors hesitant.
So it's kind of a waiting game to see how governments will ultimately decide to regulate Bitcoin.
In many ways, yes. It's a complex landscape, and different countries are taking different approaches. Some are embracing it, some are cautious, and some are still trying to figure it all out.
It sounds like the future of Bitcoin is still being written.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so fascinating. There's so much potential, but also so much uncertainty.
Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the technology behind Bitcoin, the potential uses, and even the challenges it faces. But there's still one big question that I haven't gotten an answer to. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto?
Ah, yes, the mystery of Satoshi Nakamoto. It's a question that has captivated the world ever since Bitcoin first emerged.
It's like a real-life detective story. Do we have any clues about who this person or group of people might be?
There have been countless attempts to unmask Satoshi, but so far, the true identity of Bitcoin's creator remains a secret. Some believe Satoshi chose to remain anonymous to protect their privacy and avoid the spotlight. Others speculate that they might no longer be alive, or that Satoshi Nakamoto was a pseudonym used by a group of developers.
Wow, it's incredible to think that this revolutionary technology was created by someone who has chosen to remain completely unknown.
It adds to the mystique of Bitcoin, doesn't it? But regardless of who created it, one thing is clear. Bitcoin is a force to be reckoned with.
Okay, so we've got this mysterious creator, a revolutionary technology, and a whole lot of potential. What's next for Bitcoin? We'll explore that and more after a quick break. Right, we are back for the final part of our deep dive into Bitcoin. We've talked about the tech, the potential uses, even the mystery surrounding its creator. Now, I want to talk about the bigger picture, like how could Bitcoin change the way we think about money,
The whole world. That's where things get really interesting. Because you see, Bitcoin isn't just a new type of money. It's a whole new way of thinking about finance. It challenges the traditional system, where governments and banks hold most of the power.
So it's about more than just making payments or investments.
Yeah, exactly. Bitcoin introduces the idea of a system where transactions happen directly between people, without needing a bank in the middle. It's all about decentralization, remember?
Right. Decentralization. But wouldn't that kind of turn the whole financial system upside down? What happens to banks and governments if everyone starts using a currency they can't control?
Well, that's a question a lot of people are asking. Some experts think that Bitcoin could actually lead to a more democratic financial system, where individuals have more control over their money.
More democratic, huh?
Yeah. Imagine a world where access to financial services isn't limited by where you live or whether you have a bank account.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. That sounds pretty good in theory. But wouldn't governments and banks, push back against that? I mean, they'd be losing their power.
There would definitely be challenges, for sure. But we've seen this kind of disruption before. Think about the internet.
Oh, yeah, good point.
It completely changed how we communicate and access information, even though a lot of people were skeptical at first.
Yeah, I remember when people thought email was just a fad.
Exactly. And now it's hard to imagine life without it. The internet gave power to individuals and disrupted the old ways of doing things. And Bitcoin has the potential to do the same for finance.
Okay, that's a really interesting parallel. So, are we seeing any real-world examples of this disruption happening?
We are. One example is El Salvador. A few years ago, they actually made Bitcoin legal tender.
Whoa, really? A whole country adopted Bitcoin?
Yep, they were the first. It was a bold move for sure. And the results have been mixed. It's been a learning experience, showing how complex it is to integrate Bitcoin into a country's existing financial system.
So it's a bit of a cautionary tale.
In a way, yes. It highlights the challenges of widespread adoption.
So are other countries following El Salvador's lead?
Not necessarily adopting it as legal tender, but there's definitely a lot of interest from governments around the world. Some are exploring the use of blockchain technology for things like digital ID or supply chain management.
Interesting.
And others are even looking into creating their own digital currencies, but ones that are still controlled by central banks.
So like a digital version of the dollar or the euro?
Exactly. They're called CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. It's an interesting development to watch, for sure.
It sounds like the future of finance is still very much up in the air.
It is, and that's what makes it so exciting. We're at a pivotal moment where the way we think about money and value is being challenged. It's impossible to predict exactly what will happen, but it's a journey worth paying attention to.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. For our listeners who are new to Bitcoin, what's the one key takeaway they should keep in mind?
I think the most important thing to remember is that Bitcoin is more than just a digital currency. It represents a fundamental shift in how we think about finance, one that has the potential to empower individuals and change the global economy in ways we can't even imagine yet.
That's a great way to put it. And as always, we encourage our listeners to keep learning and exploring this fascinating world. There's so much more to discover, starting with the original Bitcoin white paper, written by the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto.
Absolutely. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the vision behind Bitcoin.
Well, that about wraps it up for our deep dive into the world of Bitcoin. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay curious.